Hey yo, what is going on, viewers of the tube? My name is Tyler and welcome to your favorite crypto spot to relax. Get one-of-a-kind crypto news that is dug up from the dark corners of the internet. You might just call me...
And this name is just so bright and so sharp that the sign, it just blows up because the name is just so powerful. It says Dirk Diggler.
You know how we excavate. It's time for Chico Crypto. Well, Bitcoin has gone sideways and it's looking pretty damn bearish. It's hard to predict exactly where it's going to go next, but by today it has been officially longer than Angelo's first call from 10K to 8K. And if the timelines were going to be exactly the same for about a month, his call for the dip to 6K should have happened by now, as he called for that on October 15th. Here are the charts over the same time period for both his calls. As we can see, for the 10K to 8K call, a major slide began on the 20th of September, from 10,300 to 9,700 by the 23rd. On the tail end of the most recent chart, since November 7th, we have dipped from about 9,200 to just above 8,700 as of yesterday. The same minus 500 USD fall, but the fashion it came down to that level in is much different than last time. Choppy up and downs instead of a slow but sure bleed. Now we all know what happened last time by the 25th of September. Down it went, validating Angelo's prediction. Now is BTC getting ready to tumble down to that 6K prediction? I have a feeling it's going to, but not an immediate dump like last time, as there isn't the back factor and its disappointing launch on the 25th. But hanging below the 8.9K to 9K old support and now resistance isn't a bullish sign. But that TA Tyler analysis is for you short-term traders out there. I'm a long-term holder and investor and believe Bitcoin and crypto is going to usher in one of the greatest wealth transfers this world has ever seen, as the redistribution of wealth has hit a tipping point where the 1% control an unsustainable percentage of the world's wealth. This report was just put out over the summer in regards to the US and income inequality. 6 facts about it. We all know the middle class has been shrinking in the US, but as of 2016, last time this data was pulled, the top 20% held 77% of the wealth. The middle class held 21%, and the bottom 20 just 2%. And this is magnified when you look deeper. The top 1% now holds more wealth than the entire middle class. That flippening took place in 2010, just after the Great Recession. Now, have you ever heard of overshoot and collapse, the 80-20 rule, and what happens when the strong get too greedy in a population? Well, here's a little history lesson about St. Matthew Island, way up north 200 miles off the coast of Alaska, one of the most remote but plentiful islands. In 1944, during World War II, 19 men were shipped to the island from the US Coast Guard, and along with them, 29 Nunivak Island reindeer, which was intended as a food source for the men in case they are cut off from the supply shipments. Well, they never were, so the men never had to shoot a deer to eat, and the war ended, so the men came home, the deer's only predator on the island, leaving them free to populate with no restraints. Humans, and use the vegetative resources of the island at will. In 1957, a biologist, Dave Klein, stepped on the island for the first time in 13 years, the first human. The 29 herd had exploded to more than 1,300. Now, St. Matthew is only a 32-mile long, 4-mile wide island. That is 10 deer per every square mile. Sustainable, but competition was heating up, especially for the more nutritious summer and spring forage, and the stronger deer began bullying the weaker deer for this. Dave left and came back in 1963, 7 years later. The population of deer had exploded to a staggering amount, 6,000 deer or 47 per square mile. And after some studies done by Dave while he was there, he found that 20% of the deer, the strongest, were taking up 80% of the high-value nutrition resources during the summer, while 80% of the deer were left with just 20% of that high-value nutrition. Thus, they needed to eat the forage usually saved for the winter months, the winter lichens, depleting this even before winter came. This was noted by Dave, and he left. He returned just 3 years later to see what had happened to the population and was shocked by what he found. Just 42 reindeer and an island littered with skeletons. The herd had busted. It overshot and collapsed. Why? Resources. The top 20% competitors took up 80% of the resources. And going back to that 2016 chart, top 20% control nearly 80% of the wealth, aka resources. It's almost 2020 now, and the disparity has crossed the 80-20 threshold. I know this is deer versus humans, and the deer don't have the ability to stop their greed. Humans have a conscience that forbids them from overshooting, right? Wrong, as it's happened in the past. The Roman Empire's dramatic collapse was followed by many centuries of population decline, economic deterioration, aka wealth redistribution, and intellectual regression. This all became known as the Dark Ages because life was nasty, brutal, and short.
I'm not dead.
What? Nothing. Here's your ninepence.
I'm not dead.
Here. He says he's not dead.
Yes, he is. I'm not.
There have been many scientific papers written which prove this point, like this one, Modeling Inequality and Use of Resources in the Collapse or Sustainability of Societies, which documents this phenomenon not only in Rome, but prior dominant civilizations in Europe, both the Minoan and Mycenaean, reaching advanced levels of civilization and then collapsing virtually completely. So, as humans, have we broke our carrying capacity? Well, pulling out this chart, things get quite scary. There's the Middle Ages, aka Dark, and you see the Black Death Plague, which dipped the population. And now since, holy schmackerole, it's crazy. Now just compare St. Matthew's deer population with our world population growth. Now, I'm not the tree-hugging, save the planet type.
Well, Planeteers, what seems to be the problem?
They're cutting down the trees.
Then I guess we'll have to plant some more.
But just pulling out this chart, it's kind of obvious fossil fuels were the trigger for this overshoot. Fossil fuels come into use and the world population explodes. This chart shows a spooky correlation between oil production and the world population. What about the 1%? What do they own in America? It was oil and gas all the way up to the 1980s, but a massive shift took place when the internet changed the landscape of this world, and data became the new oil. But energy, oil, and gas is still highly important. In a 2016 list of global billionaires, 93 made their fortunes in the energy industry, with Americans and Russians having the most on that list, 41 and 18 respectively. And here's what's scary across the globe. Since 2008, it has been the top 1% that has increased its wealth fully and recovered. The 80th to 99th percent hasn't seen as much explosion, but some growth has come, while the middle class has stayed stagnant. Doesn't it seem like one group, much smaller in numbers and population, is deciding to take all the resources for themselves? As we can see from this bar chart, from income distribution and the number of households in the US, 200K and over has 8.5%, 150K to 199K, 7%, and 100K to 149K, 14.9%. A total of 30.4% of households controlling a majority of the wealth. Now, societies before us were at the mercy of the rich, which literally comes down to one factor: banks in the modern age. Banks first popped up in the BCs, in Greece, India, and Egypt around 315, and then in Rome by the early 80s, which many reports have put banking and currency mismanagement as part of their collapse. Then Damascus by 2000 AD. By 1361, central banking or modern banking came alive in Venice, and the rest is history. Banks took over, and as you can see towards the end of the chart, recession, and more recession. But unlike the unfortunate souls of the past, we today have been given the option to surpass banks with Bitcoin, blockchain, and cryptocurrency, have the option to take a chance on another economic system. It's hard to trust what exactly the New York Fed is doing, as repo operations are still continuing to this day, and they will not disclose what banks and investment firms are getting the cash for at least another 2 years. And that is causing the younger generations, especially millennials, to bet big on crypto. Nate Grassi, investment advisor, explained this on Bloomberg.
You have actual investors that you're advising. Would you ever put them in a Bitcoin ETF?
Well, you know, it's interesting. When we talk to our younger clients, we have a core gold allocation in our portfolios, and they'll ask about that and say, well, what about crypto? And if you talk to primarily millennials and ask them which they prefer, Bitcoin or gold, it's a landslide. It's not even close. It's like 90% prefer Bitcoin.
They want crypto even over stocks and gold. Millennials are about to surpass the wealthiest generation in history, the baby boomers, as the world's largest living adult generation. And as wealth is passed down to heirs, guess who will become the generation with the most disposable income by 2029? The millennials. How did the baby boomers become the wealthiest generation? The stock market, which made a great economy, safe, well-paying jobs, which allowed accumulated retirement accounts worth over $68 trillion today. Some of Generation X will get a percentage of this once the boomers pass on, but a majority of this is coming to the millennials. And the funny thing is, when the stock market first arrived on the scene, people cried it was a scam and it held no value, especially from the older generations who had never seen such a thing. But the younger ones who took the risk became some of the wealthiest people to walk this earth. Crypto, Ethereum, DeFi, and Bitcoin, it's an all or nothing. Either it's the next great transfer of wealth, or it's not. And you know my bets. Cheers. I'll see you next time.